The truth about sleeping bags, and I've got a few here, is that you can't necessarily trust what the brands tell you. Quick example, this bag and this bag, despite the very obvious differences in sizes, have got exactly the same temperature ratings. How does that work? So the ratings that the brands give you are not necessarily equal, and we'll get to that later. But first of all, I'm going to have a chat through how the rating system actually works, what to look for when you're trying to buy a sleeping bag, the different types of sleeping bags, things that'll make you warmer, things that'll make you colder, and I'm also going to let you know what I think of using sleeping bag liners. Spoiler alert, it's not good. But let's get started. So we'll talk about the sleeping bag rating system first of all, and every sleeping bag has a rating which is typically comfort, limit, and extreme. And the first thing you need to look out for is that quite often the code or the product number that's applied to the sleeping bag is not the comfort rating. So here are some examples of what I mean by this. So the Rab Neutrino 400, which says -7 in the title that's used to sell this product, actually has a comfort of -1. The limit is -7. The Exped Ultra 0 in the title, it actually has a comfort of 6 and its limit is -2, so it's kind of in between. Here's the Alpkit Sky High 500 and it uses the -3 limit as the primary number in its marketing, but actually it has a comfort of 1. So you've got to watch out for that. I've been caught out by this before. I've just looked at the title, the name of the sleeping bag, and assumed that was the comfort rating, okay? So let me explain those three different numbers. So first of all, comfort rating is the temperature at which a person wearing base layers is going to have a warm, cozy night's sleep with no issues in that bag, all right? The limit temperature is the lowest temperature at which you might actually sleep if you're like curled in a ball into a fetal position. But if you're stretched out or the conditions aren't quite right, chances are you're going to feel cold. And then the extreme temperature is the temperature at which you will not sleep, but you will survive. You won't die of the cold. So my advice is when you're buying a sleeping bag, go for the comfort and drop back about 2 degrees just to give yourself a margin of error. So look for the comfort rating. That's about 2 degrees colder than the conditions you think you're actually going to need. But not all ratings are equal. Now typically you can trust the ratings from the more premium brands. This is an Exped bag. This bag has a comfort rating. This is my summer bag. This is a comfort rating of 6 degrees Celsius with a limit of, I think it's about 0. And I've used this bag down to about 3-4 degrees Celsius and I've been warm. However, this bag here, which you can see is significantly smaller, meaning there's less actual insulation in it. This is a Nature Hike bag that costs about half the price of that bag, but has exactly the same ratings. Apparently this has a comfort of 6. I would not trust this in a 6. I know this will be colder, and I know that because it's lighter and there's less volume in it, there's less in it. If I put both these bags beside each other and just leave them for a while, they end up completely different sizes. The Exped one sort of opens up and lofts into a much larger, more puffy size than the Nature Hike. Because the other factor that comes into play is the quality of the feathers in here. The quality of the down might not be as good as the Exped, therefore it's not lofting, it's not expanding as much. So sometimes the specs can be a little bit deceiving, so you've got to watch out for that if you're thinking of buying a budget brand. For me personally, if I was looking at a budget down sleeping bag and I saw it had a comfort of 6, I would assume the realistic comfort of this bag is probably at least 10, if not slightly higher than that. So you've got to be careful. There are 2 types of filling insulation you can get in the bag. There's down and there is synthetic. Now I don't have any synthetic bags with me because all my bags are now down, but let me show you the big advantage of down, and that is that it compresses really, really small. So, okay, here's that bag. This is a stuff sack, and the way this works is you take your sleeping bag and you stuff it in it. By the way, you never ever store your sleeping bag long term in one of these because it can over time cause the feathers to lose their loft, lose their insulating power. You always store it in one of these larger bags, or even better if you've got somewhere you can hang them up. So I'll stuff this in here. You will be surprised at how small this goes. This is the sleeping bag I used for the West Highland Way this year. and I did not have a cold night. Right. I've got one knee on the bag, squashing it down. Okay, so that is the size of that sleeping bag. When it's compressed, it is tiny. I think it weighs about, and this is the advantage of using down, of using feathers. A synthetic bag with the same warmth would be probably at least twice the size of this. Now, the one disadvantage, there's two disadvantages with down. First of all, they're really expensive. This winter down bag that I have here, it's RRP's close to the 600, so down bags can be really, really expensive compared to synthetic. And the other possible disadvantage is if you get down wet, it no longer insulates. So I wouldn't want to use a down bag if I was, you know, like bivvying out overnight under the stars with no kind of extra bivvy bag or anything like that over the top. Okay, that's the basics. Let's talk about some things that will make you colder when you're in your sleeping bag. If you're fatigued, if you're hungry, if you're sick, if you get your clothes wet and damp, if it's really windy and there's wind coming through the tent, you will end up feeling colder in the bag. If you breathe inside the bag, so you should never zip the bag up and like have your mouth inside it like this. Okay. Because if you have your mouth inside the bag, you're breathing out moist air. That moist air goes into the feathers. What happens when feathers get wet? They don't insulate as well. So you want to always have your mouth out of the bag. When I'm in a sleeping bag, my preferred method is to keep my head completely out of it and put like a hat and a buff on if I need it over the top. And if it gets really, really cold, I can, you know, stick my head in and just have my mouth poking out. But you don't want your mouth inside the sleeping bag. The other thing which is really likely to make you cold is not having the right mat. I'm sitting here on a little closed foam cell mat. That might be fine in summer. This would be rubbish in winter, but insulation only works when it's allowed to puff up. Lofting, that's called. So you can see on my leg here, when I press that, there's about 1.5 inches of air, and that is what traps the warm air and keeps you warm in the bag. Underneath you, that doesn't happen because you're compressing the down, so you might as well be lying on a piece of paper, and if it's cold from underneath, you will get cold. Which brings us to things that will make you warmer, and first of all is the mat. You need a mat specifically for winter, and the warmth of mats are based on a thing called an R rating. And for winter, you probably want a mat with a rating of around R5, something like that. You can check it out and see which ones sort of correlate to the temperatures you might find that you're going to be out in. I have a couple of mats. I've got one that will go to -5, and I've also got one that will go to -20 if I really need. Now, there is one reason you might want to buy a mat that goes much colder than you think you'll actually need, and that is because mats are actually more comfortable if you don't fully inflate them, but they only give you the full insulation if you fully inflate them. So if you're going to be out in weather that's -10 and you get a -10 mat, you will only get the full benefit of that if you fully inflate the mat, which means it's not going to be as comfortable. Personally, if I'm going to be out in -10, I would want a mat that goes down to -20, and then I would just not fully inflate it, so it's a little bit softer, a little bit more comfortable, but I'm still well insulated. Other things that will make you warmer is eating before sleeping, because that sort of starts your body's engine up. Exercise before getting into your sleeping bag, so don't get into your sleeping bag while you're cold. Go do some star jumps, run up and down, do whatever you need to do, get warmed up, then get into your bag. Bags retain heat. They kind of maintain the state that you're in when you get into the bag. So if you get into the bag cold, they will maintain the coldness. I saw someone describe it recently once as like a thermos. If you put a cold drink in a thermos, it'll keep it cold. You put a hot drink in a thermos, it'll keep it warm. Sleeping bag's a little bit like that as well. Yes, your body does generate heat, but your body doesn't generate half as much heat when you're lying down and not moving. So that's why if you get up, run around, you get your body going, you get it generating more heat, and then you get in a sleeping bag warm, and it will retain that warmth for much longer. Make sure you have dry layers on when you're in your sleeping bag. If you have wet layers on, you're gonna feel cold. So always have dry base layers with you. If you pitch somewhere that's sheltered, you will stay warmer, because if you think about it, the way your tent acts, its outer layer traps a certain amount of air, and then the inner traps a certain amount of air as well, and the ability to hold that air will keep that air warmer. So if it's windy, the ventilation is going to sort of recycle that air, so the warm air in the tent is going to be constantly replaced with cold air, and if it's colder in here, then the sleeping bag has to work harder to keep the warmer air inside the sleeping bag. So if you pitch somewhere sheltered, you'll feel warmer. Right, let's talk about liners. Sleeping bag liners, and I have a couple of these. Where's the other one? I have a couple of these. The idea of a sleeping bag liner is that it's basically a little cocoon that you can stick inside your sleeping bag to add a few degrees of warmth. Here's a silk rab one that I bought a few years ago. And then here is a Sea to Summit thermal light reactor. This one claims to add about, I don't know, like 10 degrees of warmth. But yeah, that's what I think about liners, because what I found is in practice, they do add some warmth. It's nowhere near what they tell you they're going to add, but the biggest downside of the liner is you end up tangled, cocooned, and uncomfortable, and end up throttling yourself during the night. If you're somebody who gets in your sleeping bag doesn't move all night, a liner might be fine, but I find for me, I move far too much, so the liners have been absolutely useless for me. I find what works a lot better for me is I bought a pair of down trousers recently. I've got down booties, so I can put down trousers on my legs, down booties on my feet, and I can put on a down jacket. That way I'm effectively, you know, if I was using this sleeping bag, I'm almost doubling the thickness of it. And because I'm actually wearing those layers, I can still move freely within the sleeping bag. So that works a lot better for me. Something else that can add quite a bit of warmth to your sleeping bag is chemical hand warmers. Open one of these up, or a couple of these. These give off heat for 8 hours. Chuck them down the bottom of your sleeping bag, maybe down at your feet if your feet are cold, and they make a big difference. There's also a larger version of these which sticks to your back. So you open this up, peel it, stick it on the small of your back, right just above your very bottom layer, above your base layer. This gives off heat for 10 hours. I used one of these recently and had one of the best night's sleep. So much warmth in these, and I always carry one of these in winter now. Now, for me, I have loved the Exped bags that I have used over the last year, but I do appreciate the fact that these are really expensive premium bags. It's just not going to be an option for everybody. So I'm going to put a few links down in the description for maybe 2 types of bag, maybe a summer bag and a winter bag that I think might be good options for a lot of people. Hopefully you find this video useful. I'd be interested to know if there was any key bit of information you hadn't heard before or you found particularly useful. And thanks for watching, and I'll get back to more high effort adventures in the new year. So I think this video will be out after Christmas, I think. So I'm going to say Happy New Year at this point. See you in 2025. Someday. Oh!